Hey, welcome everybody, friends near and far. It's another week. It's another episode of the Regeneration Podcast, and a good episode it will be. We'll get to that. You're stuck with just your two favorite peeps, Mike Sauter and Michael Martin. Michael, I gotta make a confession. Last week you were talking about barn birds, and
Barn swallows. Yeah.
right. Well, okay. So did you possibly have a misspelling on a tweet today? Because I think it said shallows.
It did. You know what happened is it was
I thought I had the bird
autocorrect.
wrong, honestly. I know there's a type of swallow, but I'm thinking the swallows of Capistrano. I honestly thought maybe this type of bird was called
No,
shell.
no, that was what do you call it? Autocorrect
Okay, gotcha.
on Twitter did that to me, you bastards. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're
So I
like
didn't
your
notice that till
sundial.
this morning. Pardon me?
They're kind of a sundial of sorts for the weather for you in some ways. What's going on with them?
So yeah, so last week I mentioned that this time of year I start watching to see when the barn swallows leave.
Hmm.
And they left, which usually they leave in the first week of September. I think last year was about the 7th or 8th. But they left early. One time they left around the Feast of the Assumption, which is August 15th. And that year we had early frost. We had frost on September 19th, a hard frost, which killed all of our winter squash, all of our tomatoes, peppers. It was devastating.
Yeah.
So the last few weeks of the CSA were slim pickings. We had stuff, but not as much as we had planned. And so I have to think that we probably won't get hard frost September 19th, which was actually the earliest in my entire life,
Okay.
but probably toward the end of September. I bet
Yeah.
Michaelmas will probably have a hard frost, probably be in early winter. Like it
So
was like,
we'll have some people. They can document that. It's here. It's on YouTube. We'll see how it goes.
and
You
actually
mentioned-
I heard from somebody from Twitter who lives a little bit north and west of here. Lives near Lansing, and he said they left at his place too.
Okay. I'll have to look at the monastery where I work. I don't work there. I worked. I'm still over there on occasion, but they've been my kind of bellwether for that type of thing. I didn't know what their early arrival or farewell portended, but this time of year, uh, it could be that things settle in September. The school year is so dominant. But you mentioned Michaelmas. That my stomach always feels like in a weird place, whether I'm trying to build up energy for something, but it's very ambient energy. And I was just thinking I'll have to reread it, but Steiner on Michaelmas could be an episode for us. That's some of his best stuff. Remember, it sounds so cheesy the first time you hear it, but tell me if I have it wrong. He's saying that like there's a calling for people this time of year. And for me, it does resonate with this kind of ambient energy, but it's not focused. It can be anxiety provoking. But he says, it's you're trying to take something of the iron of
Right.
the shooting stars of August. And if, metaphorically, imaginatively, certainly imaginatively, but, really trying to incorporate that you can forge that to something kind of more resolute, more focused for fall, and again, we have the academic calendar and that has killed the church calendar in some ways. But I wonder, even if the academic calendar, which was, September, people start getting involved in activities.
No.
Let's say school ran from June to June. Would we still feel this way this time of year? I wonder,
Well, in England, they call this semester Michaelmas term. Okay, so that's
yeah,
even though, as Ronald Hutton told us last week,
that was
England
quite an
is
episode.
probably one of the least religious countries on earth in the West,
Yeah.
anyway. That still persists in the language, right?
Yeah.
That the church calendar still persists there, and the thing you were saying about with Steiner and the Perseid meteor showers that happened earlier in August, they kind of, for him, they imaginatively recapitulate the battle of Saint Michael and the fallen angels, right?
Right.
Which brings this, what he says, meteoric iron into the world, and kind of in a way can invigorate our thinking,
Okay.
which Lord knows we could certainly use.
You bet. We could be in control of it as opposed to other people thinking our thoughts for us, right? Pretty heavy. So speaking of things in the sky, we've got a subject today. I'll name the subject. It's called cloud busting. Cloud busting is something I'm vaguely familiar with through, for me, it was a path from Peter Gabriel, probably very familiar with the name, but maybe when I went to college, 1986, saw Peter Gabriel in concert. At that time, he was doing the album So, and I believe it was Don't Give Up was on that album, right? He had this
Yes.
touring, she wasn't touring with him, it was somebody else, but a great song, Don't Give Up, that had these haunting vocals by Kate Bush.
Mhm.
And so then I looked into her a little bit, saw this thing about cloud busting. We're going to mention the name of a German psychologist, free thinker, talk about free thinking and the sword of St. Michael. Cloud busting, tell me, like, I know a little bit about it. How did this thing first become even on your radar?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it came through Kate Bush and her song Cloud Busting, which shows up on her 1985 album Hounds of Love. And I love that album. I mean, I really didn't, here in the United States, we didn't know anything about Kate Bush, and she was a huge phenomenon in England. And I think I may have seen her once or twice on this British television show, used to be on PBS, the Kenny Everett video show.
Never heard of it.
Which was kind of cool. That's where I was first introduced or first saw the Pretenders and bands like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a comedy show. But anyway, I don't remember seeing Kate Bush on that, but I do remember hearing on the radio here in Detroit, where I lived at the time, some British band was on the radio being interviewed, and they mentioned they were letting them spin a couple of their own tunes, and they spun a song that has become back into popular culture, "Running Up That Hill,"
by
Kate Bush, which with Stranger Things became a hit again.
Oh, so it's associated with Stranger Things. I saw the first season of that. I liked it enough that I could have continued watching.
Well, with this most recent season, I guess that song, I don't know, I haven't watched it. The song features is an important thematic element, I guess.
Yeah,
it's a great song. But so I heard that song and I said, man, I got to get this album. And I bought, boys and girls, you might not know what this means, a cassette tape that I listened to in my car. And I'll never forget when I bought the cassette, my now brother-in-law, he was actually one of my friends back then. He just married my sister about a few years ago. And we get in the car and I put the tape in. I said, we got to check this out. So we're sitting there listening for a second before we drive. And there's this moment in Hounds of Love where there's this big thunderous drum roll and Kate Bush sings out, "Let's exchange the experience." And my brother-in-law looks at me and goes, "I'm going to marry her."
If you hear any rumbling from me, it's I'm usually doing this podcast from home, but when you mentioned a cassette, I'm sitting at a desk where we have some old cassettes, and I think I have that cassette.
Do you really?
Yeah, I'm not going to waste people's time, but I just glanced in there and almost knocked out the internet.
Get out!
Yeah, Kate Bush cassette running up.
So anyway,
yep.
So short story long. So after this, I worked at a bookstore at the time, actually, which is where I met my wife. And one of our friends who worked there, was a lull in the action at the bookstore. I think it was Friday afternoons got really slow. So we were listening to Kate Bush on the PA in the store. And we're just talking about how much I like this album. And Cloud Busting came on. And it's a cool song. And we're talking about it, and my friend tells me, "Well, it's based on a true story." I said, "No, really? What's it about?" And it's about this in the video. This little boy played by Kate Bush, whose father is a scientist, invents this machine to make it rain, and in the video, it's essentially the FBI or somebody from the Department of Justice comes to arrest him.
No. Trust your neighborhood intelligence agencies, Michael.
Yeah, right.
Continue on.
So let's play a little clip of the song just so people can get a hang of it. Let me see.
I see somebody knocking on your window. It could be the feds.
Okay, so here we go. Yeah, it probably is the feds. They were the feds. We tried to actually ladies and gentlemen of the audience. We tried to record this yesterday, but my internet went out, so it's pretty convinced Feds jumped on us.
Yeah.
So here's a clip of Kate Bush's cloud busting.
I still dream of Organon. I wake up crying, you're making rain, and you're just in reach. When you in sleep escape me, you're like my yo-yo that glowed in the dark. What made it special, made it dangerous, so I bury it and forget.
Okay, that's pretty good. So this song, inspired this conversation with my friend. She tells me it's a true story, and then she pulls off the shelf at the bookstore this book right here, a book of dreams by Peter Reich, who is still alive, is the son of Wilhelm Reich.
Do you think he's still alive? I actually think that's
He is.
relevant.
I looked it up
Okay.
this morning, actually, and
We should get him on sometime.
he's not. I mean, he's probably in his 70s. I'm guessing.
The daffier, the better.
He's probably. I think he was born. He's like the age of the Beatles, probably.
Okay.
No, a little younger, I think. I know his sister's still alive because I know somebody who knows his sister, and she is
That's
a
great.
bit older.
That's great for social cachet. I know
Yeah.
somebody who knows somebody who once got a wrong phone number from a guy who knows William Reich.
That's me. That's
Yeah.
right. It's about as much as I have right here. But anyway, so I read the book, and especially the first half of the book is fascinating because it tells the story of Peter Reich with his father, and Reich, who was a psychoanalyst who had trained with Freud, who was an associate of Freud's, of that wonderful generation of psychoanalysts who had been under the tutelage of Freud, like Jung, Reich himself, Adler, all these people who came up in that generation. Really, some I think of the most creative psychoanalytic thinking ever, before psychoanalysis was taken over by the pharmaceutical industry.
Man, what a sad devolution.
It is. And anyway, so the book's fascinating, and a big part of the book is when Peter, who was then probably about 10 years old, would go with his father on these expeditions or something, whatever you want to call it, to make it rain, taking their cloud buster. And let me drop I'm going to drop another screen share here.
This is going to be a picture.
This is going to be an image. Yes.
We're going to see whose it is. Kate Bush's, William Reich's, Peter Reich's, or I'm guessing could be Michael Martin's Cloudbuster.
It's not mine. Let's see what we got. Here we go. So here, can you see that?
I can't, actually.
You can?
No, I cannot.
Okay, let me see. Let me do this the right way here. Oh, I got the wrong thing to share. Okay.
I'll talk about William Reich a little bit, and you'll have.
Okay, can you see that?
Let's see. It said started screen sharing, and it comes up. There's the image.
Okay. Yeah, good.
That's
So
this firing up something.
This is Wilhelm Reich.
Okay.
In his 50s. Now, this is his Cloudbuster, which is a mammoth Cloudbuster. When you see the picture of mine, you'll go, wow.
And let me tell people listening to us on YouTube, and vice versa. Listening to us on a podcast, you can find this at YouTube with these images and so forth, at the Regeneration Podcast, Google.
Yeah.
That, my last name, Sauter, you'll find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's this big thing. And his, I guess the pipes on his were 9 to 12 feet long, which is twice almost twice the length of mine. His were steel, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can see he's got some kind of conduit or hose from the back of the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the story is, and Peter Reich tells about this, that, where was I? So he would go out on these expeditions with his father and make it rain. And it's interesting where, in fact, I think it was also Reich's son-in-law who would also come with them, who was probably in his 20s or 30s at the time. And it's an actual story that in 1950s in Maine, which is where Reich, who was originally from Austria, lived at the time, there was I think it was 51, 52, a really horrible drought that was going to take out the entire blueberry crop. And the farmers around in Wrangley, Maine, where Reich lived, came to him and said, "Can you do something about this? We heard you can make it rain." And he made it rain. I think he pulled up some rain, and I think they got an inch or two of rain, which saved the crop.
If I did that, it would endear me to the farmers around here. That's a good way to be neighborly, for one thing.
Well, and let me show you this other image if I can.
From Catholic sources.
Sure. So here you go. So here's oh, it's not showing up. What's going on here?
My screen says there's nothing to show here, which seems crazy.
Yeah, it just disappeared on me. Okay, let me see.
I like the fact that there's words there.
I don't know why this one keeps. For some reason, this one keeps dropping out on me. So let's see what I can. Oh, give me a second.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
We have software that takes out some of these silences too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. All right, here it comes.
I like how we both have kind of bifocals, I guess. We both look at the computer screens in the same way.
I know, it's crazy,
The
isn't it?
bottom 1/10 of our glasses.
Okay. Huh.
Mine still says nothing to show here.
Keeps dropping out here. Let's go. Can you see that?
Okay.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is from the San Bernardino Daily News. You can't see the date because that green box is annoying. But this is from 1952. New chemical discovery permits rain to be controlled like weather from tap.
Was
So
like working with this, or was this like an opposite approach?
No, but this is stuff that was going on in the 50s, and it's why I think it's kind of fascinating to me, is that, and I remember being a kid in the 70s and 80s, there were news reports regularly, not every week or anything, but on a habitual basis about developments in learning and how to control the weather.
Yeah.
And recently you may have seen it. I know it was one of them. I saw a story December 20th, I think, of 2020. There was a story about China, they were going to up their weather controlling game. And apparently I saw this recently, a video, a news interview. I caught it on Twitter, but I think it's from a mainstream source that during the Olympics in Beijing, China actually displayed their weather controlling prowess.
I'll have to look into that one, because I've seen mainstream reporting that like they're certainly looking into this. At the same time, we know that, again, why wouldn't they be trying if they could? Like, you and I might think it's nefarious the way you go about it, but people shouldn't be shocked that they're trying to do this. It seems very natural. On the other hand, just like anything else, there's probably good and bad ways. But then if we're allowed to talk about it, for some reason people think you're like crazy for even thinking they would do this. They're trying to do everything.
But then that's the point, right? And so it's, look, so this is 70 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is 70 years. So from what I've read, that this really became a thing following World War II, that what's now called DARPA and other kinds of organizations were trying to find ways to control the weather. And I think there was another thing I saw just recently some Mideast country, was it Bahrain, or they made it rain. They seeded the clouds, and they had an inch of rain in the desert.
Hmm.
So and the thing is, I mean, when so what happened with Reich, though, is Reich he was eventually arrested. I mean, because one of the reason he got into this cloud busting is he said, allegedly discovered this energy, which he called Oregon energy.
I've read a lot about that. Yeah.
Which is a kind of a life energy, and he connected it to initially where he started with this was in his work in sexuality and sexual repression, which he saw coming out of the Freudian school of psychoanalysis, that it so sexual repression would lead to psychological problems, which we know that's true, right?
Yeah.
And so absolutely true. And so he was trying, and he wrote a book, I think it came out in 1928, called The Function of the Orgasm, really trying to understand this and understand what we do to ourselves in our sexual lives.
Now, let me interject something here that they have. So I haven't read a lot of William Blake. I've read a lot about him. But then there's also stuff about him from kind of a Catholic apologetics take. And I've read the take, and I just don't know enough to know how much it's true, but I think it works within a certain framework. So you could have the opposite of repression could be expression, but that expression could be channeled or dissipated, and the worst could be the corruption of the best. And
right.
At least some Catholic hot takes, and I think they were trying to quote stuff, were not just even accusing him of being maybe ignorant of the differences, because the differences could be all important, but that, and I'd have to look this up, but some quote to the effect that, like, if you brought this stuff into like all the monasteries and all the convents, kind of quoting William Reich, don't know if it's true, that you'll see everybody leave in droves because like God will cease to exist for them. And I wondered if he thought God was just like, some specter that the repressed mind comes up with or something.
No, actually, he believed in God. And though I think he had, he was really attracted to the figure of Christ. He's got a book called The Murder of Christ. So he saw Christ as like the one liberated person, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he thought Jesus was divine or anything, but
well, maybe he's been to the church.
And when he was in prison, and then one of the things his son writes in the book is that the thing he kept in his cell in prison was that famous engraving or etching of Albrecht Dürer of the Praying Hands, right?
Wow. Yeah, right.
So he's a more complex figure than that, but it's true that people who applied Reich's ideas about letting sexuality out of the out of the box.
Yeah.
That and he's accused of being an apostle of free love or whatever. But so is William Blake. Right?
Yeah, right.
But
and
I think it's more complicated than that, because, and also he one of the things he was out of the school of Freud. He thought homosexuality was a mental disorder, right? So to saddle him with all those kinds of things, I think is wrong. But what I think is interesting with him is one of the things he came up with, which I think is a really fascinating idea, is this idea of armoring, that that beings or organisms, we could say, in hostile environments acquire armor.
They certainly
protect
do.
themselves from that hostile environment. So looking at the example of the desert. So
I'm thinking armadillos, cacti. I'm thinking of lots of other insects that are pretty well armored.
And they all have armor, right? They all have tough skins with spikes and stuff, right? To protect the inside, which is soft, like cactus, right? So by analogy, he said, now look at people who grow up in hostile environments. What do they get like? They get armored as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Hard on the outside, trying to protect something. And so one of his goals in psychoanalysis was to help people de-armor, right? To de-armor. And he would even, one of the points in Peter Reich's book, Reich would often push against Peter's stomach to see that he wasn't tight and hard, that he could be open and free flowing, which is kind of an interesting thing, right?
What do you think about just one thing? You know, you work with young people too, but right now, when there's this huge call for resiliency training, right? Do you see those as a pendulum swing, or maybe working on two different tracks? Because we're both kind of can see roles for both of those. There's no doubt. But could a society become so disarmored right now that people are asking to like?
No, our society is hyper armored.
I think it's armored. Yeah,
hyper armored. I think that's what happens with propaganda programs and mass formation, which he was all against. I mean, he was a Jew, even wasn't out practicing, but he was a Jew who had to leave Austria to get away from the Nazis, right? So he hated totalitarianism, and he thought totalitarianism was the ultimate armoring of a society.
Yeah.
Right. It's the opposite of freedom.
Yeah. And I suppose again, and people, two things. One is mentioning William Reich. If there's some shady things for people, you and I would both agree, and this isn't revolutionary. I just have a feeling that some of our listeners, like if I was in high school, my college days, I was just kind of in Catholic apologetics. You know, you're looking for totalizing arguments. This guy was a heretic or he wasn't a heretic.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that doesn't leave you too many places, you know, and we need more people. Or we'd say, you know, we both know priests. We have correspondence with them, and you're telling them an interesting book you read, and they go, oh, you realize that's not totally approved.
It's on the index.
Yeah. We need people other than priests. And I think it's all of us individually to say, like, we got to go looking for this stuff. We take our guidelines. You can use the magisterium or authority or your own religious tradition as a guide, but we definitely need more spiritual explorers. But that being said, this notion that maybe like the internet, you know, the internet could have been liberating, and it can also become of totalizing control. We know that, you know, an expression of sexuality can be liberating, but we know that libido dominandi, like when they just get you addicted to sex, they can lead you any which where. And we're definitely living in a time where that second one is true.
And
but we're both agreeing we're not laying it all at the foot of William Reich, but it does make those people who are looking for an etiology and a genealogy, you're necessarily going to go to that guy, you know.
Yeah.
You're kind of at a watershed, you know, or where a path breaks. And he was just giving ideas. And one path took some of those insights and tried to use it for, you know, enslaving people to pornography and everything else.
And that's the thing is, unless we become liberated in our own thinking and being, we're subject to slavery of any kind. I mean, for as far as I'm concerned, some kind of radical traditionalists, you know, tradie Catholics are just as enslaved as anybody who's addicted to pornography, though it might be a healthier slavery, you know, but it's not ultimately healthy, because then then it leads into the pre-sexual abuse scandal, right?
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what Reich was trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's not liberation.
Yeah.
That's
some
another
people would say it's kind of a blend that all of a sudden, you know, and fight back on this, but you'd see some convents where you had so much repression, then a wave of liberation came in. But again, it was so built up that it was not channeled. You know, everybody in every convent was sleeping together in seminary and everything like that. You know, this is tricky stuff, but the answer isn't continued massive repression.
Yeah, and as you mentioned the other day, you were talking about your friend who was talking about the seminaries and the priesthood and how many repressed homosexuals are inhabiting that space, which I know from experience, because one of the parish priests at my church when I was a kid, I was an altar boy for this guy, was one of the most notorious child predators in the Catholic Church's history.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, I remember I might have been 17 or 18. My friends and I were telling my mom about this. No, he likes boys, Mom. Cut it out. And no. And she's like, boys, you can't talk about him like that. He's a priest. You know, Mom, I'm telling you right now, he does. He asked my friend for a massage. Yeah. No man does that.
Right.
And then 20 years later, there's an article in the Michigan Catholic about this guy going up the river. And my mom calls me on the phone. Mike, did you see this? What? Yeah. Father Shirilla is going to prison because he's been sexually abusing boys. I said, Mom, I told you that 20 years ago,
Yeah.
but I couldn't believe you because he was a priest.
Now, let me ask you regarding your cloudbuster. So, and you might.
Oh yeah, we're talking about that, right?
No, but in one sense, too, but I'm seeing the same. There's these things, again, I say two things that look similar on the outside could be universes apart. Suicide and martyrdom, Chesterton said. To an outsider, you can see similar motivations. If you get on the inside, they're not.
Yep.
We've talked about other things like this. I'm thinking cloud busting. You mentioned that right now you have big multinationals, you have governments looking at this, and then you have your little cloud buster. What's to say that your form of weather control is good and the other one's nefarious? Or maybe you're not even going in that direction. Tell me your experience with cloud busting. Start getting at some of these nuances.
Yeah. So anyway, so after I met that, my friend and I had that conversation about Kate Bush and Peter Reich, and I read this book. About a year later, maybe more, a friend of mine was a chiropractor who knew I was into biodynamic agriculture and alternative ways of growing and thinking about things. He said, I got to introduce you to this guy. So we get in his car and we go, or I think we drove separately, but we go to this house in Farmington, Michigan.
Okay.
Which is about as
That's
suburban as it gets.
Yeah.
It's not wealthy, it was middle class.
Yeah.
So we're driving through this subdivision and every house looks the same. They all have the same shrubbery. They have the same chem lawn service. And then we get to this house where everything's wild.
I like the reference to Chemlon. Go ahead.
Everything's wild. And there are fruit trees all over the place. There are fig trees. There are peach and apple trees. And the grass is, 4 feet high. And we get out of the car and he goes, look, he shows me, look, we look around the perimeter of the property. He has made a creek and there are frogs and turtles and toads and snakes and all kinds of animals. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. We go into the house and we're sitting in the kitchen. I think his daughter let us in. We're waiting for this man to come and talk to us. And I'm looking around the kitchen and there's like books and piles of big bags of carrots. And there are these ducts going through that, like obviously made because they're made from plywood, and they're going across the ceiling and up from the floor. I'm sitting there with my friend just looking around, kind of mesmerized by all this stuff. And my friend leans over the table. He says, "You're waiting for something to explode in the basement, aren't you?" And I was.
It sounds like there's an animated telling of the tale, which is pretty good. The Little Prince's work of genius, But there's a recently animated one that kind of sets that story with another story of an eccentric inventor, voiced by Jeff Bridges. But the guy you're describing kind of captures, or I was thinking of Christopher Lloyd's role in Back to the Future a little bit. But
yeah, and he comes out of the basement.
But more poetic. Go ahead.
Basically, the door goes boom, and he comes out, and he's wearing striped pants and a plaid shirt, or the other way around. And he's got goggles up on top of his head, and he has his spectacles over his forehead, and he's not wearing, and it's like he has 6 eyes, and he comes out, and he's got a beard, and he's gray hair. He's probably in his 50s at the time. Starts talking almost in the middle of a sentence. And then I said to Dr. Steiner, and then whatever So we start talking to this guy, and he's giving me this rap about Rudolf Steiner and his work with chemical ethers and biodynamics, and keeps talking about Wilhelm Reich. I said, oh yeah, I read about this book about him. And he shows us his backyard where he has his garden, and it's phenomenal. I mean, I've never seen such a healthy garden, especially in the middle of the city. And he's got 2 cloudbusters. I said, and I didn't know what it was. And what's that thing? That's my little cloudbuster. I said, wow, you have one of those? I read about that. And explained to me a little bit how it worked. And I was just fascinated. His name was Herman Menke. He died recently. He was in his late 80s. At the time, he looked like a normal kind of person. He took on a more of Moses vibe later in life.
It's a cool vibe.
And he had a store, I think it's still there, called the Tree House, which I think his daughter runs now. I haven't been there in a long time, but my son's been there. So we had this great conversation, and he's sharing information, and I was really fascinated by his entire project, and impressed by his gardening results for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I left, and I would drive by because my mother and father lived only about a mile away from there. So whenever I go to see my mom, I drive by just to see how the garden was looking. Maybe 6 months later, a friend of mine who was actually training to be an organic farmer at the UC Santa Cruz organic gardening program they had, and he came home to visit during Christmas, and I said, I got to introduce you to this guy. So we get in my car, and his friend comes with us, and we go to visit Herman. And I had made some biodynamic 501 preparation with amethyst rather than quartz that I wanted to give him some. And so we go there. He's talking to us now about not only Steiner and Reich, but also Victor Schauberger.
Yeah, what a hero.
Water wizard of
Many
Germany.
shows coming on him.
Yeah. And, great conversation. But he stopped. He goes, all right, guys, who's been smoking dope? I'm like, I was like, I didn't smoke marijuana. I was about in my early 30s at the time. And my friend's like, not me. And so he puts some of the prep I gave him into this egg-shaped container, like a ceramic egg, where he triturates or spins it in there for just 5 minutes or so. And then he sprays it on us and in the room. It goes, I had to do this because somebody's smoking dope and it's making me disoriented.
Huh.
It's like, we're still looking at him. So what's this guy crazy?
But the same preparation you bought him, he would use to dissipate like weird marijuana vibes.
Yeah.
Good, God bless him. Some people just see these things. I don't,
So, and then actually, I think I bought a copy of a book on Victor Schauberger called Waters of Life. It's someplace in my house. Fascinating book. So we leave. We're going back to my house, and we're driving, and my friend's buddy said, "Whoa, that was weird, man. I only smoked a little bit of dope before I came. I just had a roach in my ashtray."
Dude, pretty wild. Called out on dope smoking when I said
wow,
I smoked dope, and I actually smoked dope.
It must have freaked him out too.
I would think so, yeah. To be in those surroundings and be like, just being spotlighted.
So those were my initial exposures to the idea of cloud busting and this kind of energy work. But then, we have to fast forward to, so that was probably 1992 or so. So fast forward to 25 years later. So we moved to this farm here, and the first year, which is 2016, where you were here, and it was my first garden here. So we didn't have a CSA. I wanted to see how the land was first. And I had a garden in the lower part of my property, not too far from where we have a pond.
I've been in that pond. I jumped into the pond with Scott Martin. Shout out.
No, Scott. Shout out to Scott. And no relation. So anyway, the next year we were having these insane rainfalls, like 5 inches of rain a week. Just insane. It flooded out our garden. We had a CSA we had to take care of. Like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And also the farms in the neighborhood were all getting flooded out.
Yeah.
So out of desperation, because I knew from talking to Herman and from what I had read that not only could you make it rain with a cloud buster, you make it stop. So I said, well, it's worth a shot. So I bought some copper pipe.
Is it like a switch, like rain, no rain?
No. Well, let me check it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought this copper pipe, and I had a bunch of wood in my barn, and so I kind of improvised and made what I thought was a cloud buster.
Mm-hmm.
And so and the idea with the cloud buster to make it stop raining is you drop the hoses into water, and you aim the pipes of the cloud buster where you can see that where the greatest concentration of humidity or water is, or the center of the storm.
Yep.
And now we have an advantage over Wilhelm Reich, who died in 1957.
Doppler.
We have a radar map in our pockets, right? He didn't have that. Can you imagine? So it was more hit and miss for him than it is for
Aren't you
us.
still just kind of looking, or are you trying to target when they're still 20 miles out? Like, how much of an advantage does it give? Like, we live in a hilly area, but I can see the clouds coming from the west. I'm guessing but it just helps you set it up ahead of time, I'm guessing. Or is it a very, very distinct advantage?
Let me show you. Hold on. Let's take this out of here. Can you?
I see cloud busting the music video.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to Facebook here. So, because I don't know where the photograph is. Should take a second. Tippy tappy, almost there. There we are. There's my cloud buster.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
This is not the one I used 6 years ago. This is the one I just made last year.
That's a great picture of a cloud buster in addition to a great cloud buster.
Yeah.
It looks like it's busting clouds.
So here it was.
Okay.
So here's the thing. So I did this and I dropped it. We were getting another deluge and I dropped the hoses in the water, pointed it where I saw the heaviest part of the cloud cover coming from. And it stopped within 10 minutes. We still got more rain like the next day, but it started to behave itself. And I thought, could be a coincidence.
Sure, you need a control group.
And I was not totally, I was, like I said, it was just out of desperation. I thought I'll try this. I don't know what else to do. But I tried it a couple more times and it seemed to work within 10 minutes. And I was discussing it with my friend Drew, whom you met at the conference in 2016. And Drew lives about 6 miles away. So, and he's like, I don't know, this sounds crazy. It might work. And then we are having another deluge and he's got a little farm too. So he texted me in jest, really. He said, dude, can you do something about this rain? And I'm like, BRB. So I go outside, I dropped the hoses in the water, pointed it where I thought the rain was coming. It stopped in 10 minutes, which sold Drew. And then I
see a storyline starting again, like these questions I have that, like, again, the independent guy with his land, as opposed to like a top down one size fits all. That's just a theme, but go ahead. Like, I'm tracking themes on this because the microcosm always mirrors the macrocosm in these stories. Go.
And then I have another friend, Brent, who lives maybe 8 miles south of us, who also has a farm. And he knew it. He got caught when I was doing, and he's at the point now where he'll text me. He goes, do you mind not using the cloud buster? We're trying to get some rain over here, because there's a way you can use a cloud buster that will. I think what it does, it creates a kind of envelope in the atmosphere, so it keeps rain from moving in, or clouds from moving in.
I thought it was going to be like he's coming and say, "Can I borrow?" My wife needs a cup of sugar from Bonnie, and I need like a bandsaw. And can I borrow your cloud buster for a little while?
Well, that's basically it. Yeah, I said, well, he's much more mechanical and gifted in building things than I am, so he can make his own. But so this is like you mentioned, Bonnie, my wife, right? So when I was first building this thing, she's like, "What are you wasting your time? We have other things to do." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna try. If it works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't." But she's convinced enough now, because I've made it rain a few times. In fact, quite a few times this summer, I made it rain, and she's convinced that it works, because now she expects it.
Right.
Like, and she's, she'll say, "You should have made it rain yesterday." I said, "Well, I didn't want to be messing with the weather all the time. You should have made it rain." And, I keep teasing her, and the kids think it's funny that I said, "You know what? Other couples don't have these discussions." They just don't.
Things non-Martins talk about.
Yeah. Other wives don't yell at their husbands about the weather.
I know it's also, I do some annulments for the parish. It's not on the annulment form is the reason why a marriage broke up, like disagreements over the use of
cloud busting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is how I got into it. And I am convinced it worked. Now, what happened about a year ago, I don't know what happened, but I don't know how it happened, is my cloud buster, which during the summer I keep down on the dock that you and Scott jumped off of into my pond.
Don't tell me it got busted. Your cloud buster got busted?
It ended up in the pond.
Yikes.
And I don't know. and it had been there,
It's
had
the
been there through.
anti-Reichians. It's a new militia group, the anti-Reichians, who go around Michigan.
Well,
kidnapping.
you know what? Get this. So I told you about Herman. One of the things Herman told me was that he had a visit from the FBI
Huh.
about his cloudbusters.
Yeah, right. Definitely did.
And he said, "Oh, it's just my little cloudbuster. I don't have any weapons over here." So DARPA visited him, and at first I was like, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not really out to get you, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was blown in by the wind, which did not seem plausible because
It
we
looks
had
like a
some
pretty heavy thing there. You got a lot.
Well,
of
this one's not that heavy. The
But
other
all
one
those
was
pipes,
super heavy.
those pipes are kind of. What are those pipes made of?
Copper.
That's at least 150 pounds.
No.
Really? Okay.
Maybe
just-
maybe 100. Maybe 100. It's not super heavy.
Okay.
This one anyway. And this one's on wheels, and the other one was not on wheels.
Yeah, I think it
But-
rolled it.
But the other one ended up in the pond, and I
Uh-huh.
fished it out, and I had to get rid of it, except for I saved the pipes. These are the same pipes.
Mhm.
But the other one I made had two. This has 6 pipes. They're 5 feet long each because it's from 10-foot pipes I cut in half. The other one I had in 2 rows of 3 pipes.
Okay.
Like almost like you would see on a 6-ounce dice, right?
Uh-huh.
But this one I decided to tighten up and make closer. So it's basically a 5-pointed star pattern with one in the center. You can see that one sticking out.
Yeah, it's a long one.
And I use electrical conduit for pipes, or for hoses, I should say.
Mhm.
This one seems to be really much more effective than the other one. And this image right here is from back in March when we had, and we can talk about this in a second, chemtrails. You know,
Mhm.
there's a lot of controversy about that, right? And they had been there in the sky. You can see, and I pointed the cloudbuster, and within 10 or 15 minutes, it did this to the chemtrails.
Hmm.
And Reich would call this, well, he would call what you see in chemtrails, DOR, or dangerous orgone.
Okay.
And it looks like what I did here is introduce some positive orgone into it. Now, his word was orgone. Other people have different words. If you go back into medieval and early modern science, natural science, this is what they called ether.
It really, okay. So I wondered, but you're saying a 1-to-1 correspondence, people could read Reich and just substitute the word ether.
I think so.
Okay.
And he was trying to figure out a new vocabulary for it, make it sound more scientific
And
more
sexual.
modern, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And more like sexual.
And Steiner talked about chemical ethers and stuff like this.
Uh-huh.
And I think now, so we're going to talk about chemtrails. Now, I was as skeptical as anybody about this chemtrail thing, right? I thought, come on, no one is going to spread this stuff to poison people.
Well, what's the main? So if I don't even know, like I come across the term, I've probably read some, I've never done a deep dive. Let's say I was a total cynic. What do I think about them? It would be that the government is spreading through 2 trails in the sky or whatever. They're spreading various things, or specifically like one sort of chemical.
There are
fertilizers.
aluminum oxide, I think, is one of them, barium and other things.
The goal being,
And there are, you know, I've seen documentaries that actually they go in planes and they measure the levels of barium or aluminum and these are trails that come from airplanes or jets.
yeah.
But what happens with what are called chemtrails is these trails go across and they don't go away.
Uh-huh.
What they do is they kind of spread, and by the end of the day, and sometimes you see dozens and dozens of these things going across the sky,
I've seen them, for
which
sure.
I don't know about you, Mike, but I don't remember seeing that when I was a kid.
Not as much. And again, what's the claim made? Like brain control? Like
Something like that. And
Okay.
here's where I was with this,
Yeah.
right? When I had the cloudbuster, I had heard about chemtrails. I said, well, at the very least, the stuff that's coming out of those planes can't be healthy,
Right.
right? Even if it's
all
just pollution, it's still pollution. I said, so let's see if I can, neutralize them or do something, and as you can see right here, when I made the second design of the cloudbuster, I got more of these kinds of feathery patterns
Uh-huh.
the sky. And other people I know who've been interested in this, they say, yeah, that's Orgone energy dissipating the DOR.
Huh.
So so I figured, it's worth a shot. I mean, if I see them, if it's only pollution, it's good. If it's chemtrails, even better, right?
Now,
And you'll see, but before you go that,
yeah.
you'll see sometimes, and I see them, look in the sky. I'll see a couple jets going by with these long chemtrails going behind them, like cover the sky. And sometimes you see them in a kind of a grid pattern, right?
Certainly.
Sometimes I've even seen them in 5-pointed star patterns, believe it or not. So you see that, and then you'll see another jet going by with nothing.
I've totally seen that, so I can tell the viewers I've seen that.
Or you'll see a jet where it has what's called a contrail, which is a short trail behind it of, they think, condensation, condensation from, just like you would get a dehumidifier, I guess. It's just ice crystals, and it goes away, and it doesn't take over the whole sky, and it doesn't spread. So I figured it's worth a shot.
In the chemtrail debate,
whatever it happens to be.
Does anybody admit that, like, at least planes are leaving these two long lines, or do they say you're not seeing them, or do they say no, those are just contrails, but there's very little atmospheric activity, so they just linger longer? Is that the standard rejoinder?
That's one of them. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
And I was cool with that explanation for the longest time, because I didn't think the government would do anything to poison us until the last 2 years. So here's a funny story. So I was experimenting. This is a couple of years ago with the old, I think it was my first Cloudbuster. So I was just experimenting to see whether it worked or not. I was not completely sold, doing some experiments, seeing what kinds of results I would have. And I made it rain a few times. I didn't make it rain a lot the first time I had, first year, because I didn't want to mess with the weather. And I noticed, though, so say I have, I look on with the weather map, the radar, and I see, and we're in middle central south Michigan. So if I'll see, say there's a rain system over by Chicago or in Indiana, or even a little bit farther, over the Lake Michigan, I'll see if I can pull it over. And so I'll drop the hoses in the water, point it in the direction where the rain system is.
Drop the hose in the water, you're drawing water. Don't have the hoses in the water, you're trying to dissipate water.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And not dissipate chemtrails or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and I'll see if I can pull it over. And it always works. Now, the thing is with that way to going about it, you kind of have to babysit it, because it seems to me that the rain systems are like animals where they need to be directed a little bit. They want to move the other way. You go, okay, I'm up this way. So yesterday, for instance, I put it out because I saw we hadn't had rain in over a week and wanted to get some moisture. And there was rain not too far away. So I put it out, but I didn't have time to babysit it. And it rained, but not at our farm. It rained 3 miles south of us. So it came near, and that happens sometimes. But other times you can do it. There's a way to do it where this is what Reich would do, where he would set it out for, say, 3 to 6 hours, and calling a draw, and then turn it off. Which is, for turning off means pushing the hoses or the pipes toward the earth or toward the water, and usually within 24 to 48 hours you get rain. And I've done that quite a few times this summer, where most places in Michigan were experiencing drought, and we were getting an inch of rain a week.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So it worked. I mean, you could say it's coincidence. Maybe it is, but I have a lot of coincidences, right?
Right. And that's where probably I am with it until I would try it. But I think, that, I always think about not exclusively, but the larger picture. You could have farmers trying to you have a canal or a lake trying to draw off and canalize some water to their garden and things. We've done that since time immemorial, going back to Mesopotamia, and you're trying to do something up there. Because I'm still wondering, not that there is no distinction, but we want to get into the distinction of, like, why you effing with the weather is a good thing, why other people doing it could be bad. But right now, without forcing anything, I see that, like, the individual landowner has done similar things, but when you get something like the enclosure movement, which we've talked about, or huge top-down designs, part of this regeneration podcast is instead of saying everything good, bad, left, right, politically, that we can get pretty far if you use frameworks of like liberty and tyranny and bottom up versus top down, right?
Well,
I don't know if I even have a Facebook profile description of myself, but if I do, it was put up 20 years ago. It's just, I prefer bottom up solutions to things. Individuals, kind of networking with other individuals, trying to like solve problems.
And I think that the difference between what I'm doing and what DARPA is doing, or China is doing.
What does DARPA stand for?
I can't remember.
I don't even know.
Bad.
What is it? I don't even know what it is. It's a cool sounding organization.
Satan or something like that. I think the difference is what I think what you're dealing with when you're working with this kind of energy, this orgone, or if the ethers, it's good, right? It's life-bearing.
It's like with them, you're dancing with them as opposed to making them into a Frankenstein monster.
Right. I think by analogy, it's the difference between biodynamic agriculture and industrial agriculture.
Say more about that.
Where biodynamic agriculture is, part of it is a healing of the earth, right? Yeah. It's not exploitive.
Yeah.
It's not an exploitation of the earth. It's a healing of the earth. It's working with the energies of what, not only the seasons and the sun and everything, but the energies of the soil. And you work to influence the soil, but you're not exploiting it.
Right.
And I think that's the difference between cloud busting and cloud seeding or DART, whatever China was doing, right?
Yeah.
And because man, gosh, if I can do this with $80 worth of pipe, can you imagine what somebody with a budget of $2 billion could do? Right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's a great video out there of John Lennon talking about world leaders. He goes, talk about why is there still war? I mean, it's like, these people getting into power. They're homicidal maniacs. They're just insane.
They totally are.
And they are, and they're still that way.
Yeah, you can think of like St. Louis of France. You could get somebody who, hereditary monarchy, at least some of those guys can turn good, but who now with the current political system could ever climb that and not end up woefully corrupted to the point of the worst crime?
In fact, there was a video I saw on Twitter yesterday of Vladimir Putin. And he was talking about the United States, and he said about the president.
Black box. Yeah.
No, he's about the president. He said, some guy comes into office. He has all these ideals and good ideas and stuff. And
then the guys with suitcases. I said black box. Yeah,
the guys with the suitcases come in. This is how it's going to be.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And you saw that happen with Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Who was all pro organic and pro natural, and those guys must have come in there and said, nope, you're going to be supportive of Monsanto. You're going to put Tom Visselak in charge of agriculture.
Or the war criminal, George Bush II, who came into office saying, we're not seeking monsters to destroy anymore, only to just, find monsters first term.
He's not about nation building, right?
Yeah.
And those guys came and said, oh, yes, you are.
Yeah. What comes to mind politically, too, regarding some of this is, and you'd be aware of this, but it was said so well, maybe even 15 years ago. A lot of our listeners would know the name Patrick Deneen, who writes for Front Porch Republic. And, he's got a lot of insights. But one was looking at the political divides between left and right as saying, again, the right would say, don't change this male into a female, like this ecosystem, my body. Don't put birth control in there. Don't mess with this. A man's a man, a woman. But like you can turn that hill into a casino by flattening the hill, and you can take this river out and you can turn a desert, but we can mess with things out there. And the flip side is the left, maybe drawing with too big of a brushstroke, but it certainly gets at something. The left would say you could never touch that sacred earth, no chemicals in that field, but certainly put chemicals in me to control birth, change, lop off my penis and things like that, but we're still, that the way we look at ourselves and the way we look at the environment, sacramentally, symbolically.
Yeah.
That's the tertium quid. That's what's going to see us through this morass. Taking shelter with one of the two political tribes is not going to get you anywhere. You're either going to like disfigure yourself if you're a leftist, or you're going to disfigure the environment. If you're from the capitalist adoring right, it's this student loan thing for another one. But sane people can agree or disagree. But the Democrats are pandering to their base, but we have to remember the Republicans would pander to the capitalists and the banks.
Well, I mean, that's the assumption. But if you look back at the last decade or so, the Democrats are so in the
Yes.
pockets of the banks and the corporations now.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Obama, I would say.
But also these intelligence agencies, yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, it's wickedness. And this is the thing. I mean, for me, in a way, my excursions into cloud busting are actually an outgrowth of my increasing Christian anarchist sensibility about things.
Yeah.
That not only is it sacramental, but I feel that I have an obligation to heal the earth. I mean, at least the little piece of earth that I'm privileged to stand on.
Yeah, and you do make it clear. Remember, I don't know, coming into this conversation, we hadn't debriefed or anything. I'm sitting here now an hour in saying, gosh, shit if I know whether the thing works or not. I trust you. You're a good friend. I know you're open-minded. So like everything, like I'm saying, well, let's, people need to try more things. I was interested in, what makes your form of weather control good, but other ones bad. Right. And I've kind of come to some lineaments of that. I certainly don't have any sense, that what you're doing is other than like taking a few. I live near one of these beautiful Finger Lakes. I could go down there and just grab a bunch of water. You're doing it in kind of a different way. We all kind of, when you said, I like the image that you're trying to tease things like pets, that you could set it up and ignore it. It's not going to work. But if you want to kind of play with a weather mass that might have a personality or something, and kind of tease him or her towards you, I don't know. I like it. It fits with my poetic sensibilities.
Making it rain during drought is not messing with the environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's bringing healing. And now we did a double-blind study once.
Yeah.
So check this out. This is kind of a funny story.
And I'm putting up "Make It Rain" in the Urban Dictionary, because I think it's also when, for young people, that phrase colloquially means a slang term for throwing out lots of cash to dancers and strip clubs as if money is raining down on them. So every time we've been saying "Make It Rain," we have a lot of things going on.
Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of hits, and people are gonna be really disappointed. But
yeah.
Still old guys talking about.
We should title this one "Make It Rain."
Yeah. So anyway, here's my double-blind story.
Thing, by the way, go ahead. Yeah.
So maybe it's 2 years ago in the winter. It was probably March or February. It's cold, and it was a Sunday, and I had driven into town. Right, one of the closest town is Chelsea, Michigan. Closest big town. So I was. My
uncle used to run the proving grounds for Chrysler.
Oh yeah, that's right over there.
Yeah.
So I drove over there to go to the grocery store or hardware store or something, and I'm coming home, and I look up in the sky in the west, and there were dozens, and I mean dozens, of chemtrails. Chemtrails, whatever you want to call them. And I'm like, oh man, I got to hurry up and get home and put the cloudbuster out there. So I'm driving, and then I get about a half mile down, and they're all going away. I'm like, wow. I said, is Bonnie using the cloudbuster? She never touches the cloudbuster. I get home, and sure enough, the cloudbuster is pointing up where those chemtrails were.
Yeah, wow.
And I go in the house. I said, Bonnie, did you just do that? He goes, no, but I saw those chemtrails, and I told Daniel, my son, who was then 9, to go point it up there.
That's great.
And he took him out, and it went. And the thing is, I was seeing it happen, not knowing that somebody at my house was messing with the cloudbuster.
Now, do you have
watching exactly what had happened before?
Do you have cloud busting Facebook groups and things like that? I mean, is there a community?
There probably are.
Yeah,
there probably.
Like anything, you want to share stories and work with what's working for you, what's not working. Get a community of people that can kind of be self-policing.
I mean, I know people who I have been into. In fact, it's kind of interesting story. So. Herman Menke, whom I mentioned earlier, where I first heard about this stuff, he actually apprenticed quite a few people who would come to him and learn his tricks and tools. And 2 young men, well, young compared to us, but were here at the farm. One actually had some biodynamic preparations he wanted me to give to me as a gift, which is very nice of him. And another one,
Is that what biodynamic farmers do? I didn't know that was a thing. I'm going to come with a preparation.
oh, it's very cool. I mean, they're
Yeah,
hard to
I
make, and he gave me
yeah.
some really nice ones.
That's cool.
And then I think it was last year at Michaelmas, this young family came to celebrate with us. I had never met them before. They were invited by friends of friends.
Yeah.
And the guy, I'm talking to him, and he's standing. So you've been at my farm. So the barn and the house are on top of the hill, and we have the gardens and then the pond at the bottom. And so I had the cloudbuster over there, and he's looking out there, and he comes to me, this is your house? I said, yeah. He goes, I knew I came to the right place. I said, why? Because I saw your cloudbuster.
That's funny. Yeah.
And he used to train with Herman.
Wow.
So it was kind of it was an interesting thing. So they're out there, right? There are people out there trying to do this, and I think it's good work.
It is. Color me interested. There's no reason in my worldview why, with the advancement of knowledge and people playing with things with a good spirit, like the good old scientists who just, started fiddling with things, with a playful instinct, not one to dominate. And why shouldn't this continue is where I'm at.
Well, I think Nikola Tesla is another one, right?
Sure. And again, we mentioned Victor Schauberger.
Victor Schauberger. There were people, and this is what, and I have, my doctorate is in early modern English literature, and I wrote on mostly religious writing from the 17th century. But you study that period, and most of the people in my dissertation were alchemists of some type or another.
Right.
And I've written, in fact, even in The Submerged Reality, I have a chapter on Robert Flood, who was also a scientist, physician, as well as being a mystic of a sort. And it's always been my position that there was something lost with Descartes and the scientific revolution, which bifurcated. Bifurcated, the supernatural doesn't exist. And so, in fact, that's when they said ethers doesn't exist. They don't exist anymore, right? Also, life doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, Zoe and Bios, right? Zoe is the life that makes life life. Like when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Zoe is the word. Bios means habits of living. Like bios is what I do for a living, or, what constitutes the physiognomy of a frog or whatever, right?
Everything is bios.
But it's Zoe is the thing we lost, right? Or you could say the soul of the world, or Sophia, right? And I think things like this business with cloud busting, or Reich's discovery of the Oregon, or rediscovery of ether, or whatever you want to call it, right? It shows us that science, as it's been delivered to us, is not all there is to science, or to natural science, right? And I've always questioned whether if the scientific revolution had not kicked God and the supernatural to the curb, what kind of science will we have? And there are scientists out there who are asking those questions, and not just, fringe scientists like Reich, or even Tesla, who wasn't fringe, or there are people out right now. Rupert Sheldrake's one of them, who are open to these questions. Another one, what's his? Brian Josephson, Nobel Prize winner. He's also open to these questions, right? And they all have a serious critique of the scientific establishment being co-opted by corporations and governments, which it has by and large. There's no denying. And as Sheldrake points out, he goes, oh yeah, talk about science. Well, guess what? There are not millions of dollars of research money going in to study butterflies. Okay? No.
That who is Bernard Latour? Is that his name? The Frenchman. He's so good on that. Just on with a gentle approach, just humbly wading to the waters of the research, on the success of double-blind experiments, how it is anthropologically and psychologically that scientists get swayed to see those results that bring them big money. So it's not just an accusation. He tries to break it down, how these things work. But we don't have to be, sane people can start to agree on this, because we're talking about human nature,
Right.
and how things get co-opted, and how, we've mentioned so many times Edward Bernays and so forth, but how advertising works, how big money works. But yeah, a good playful science. You're kind of carving your path to keep it going. Again, I have one question as we kind of wind up, is if you want to get rich, I'm sure you're flowing in cash and have no need for money.
You know
But
it.
could you make a smaller one of these that people could use, like on the cusp of a long car trip, to kind of regulate or dissipate their need to take leaks during long journeys? That's a cash cow, don't you?
I haven't thought about that. My son actually, when he was in high school,
Make water. I don't want to make water on this 4-hour thing. Can you help me?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
My son made a little tiny cloudbuster when he was in high school.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't have a cloudbuster at that point, but he
Yeah.
made a little tiny one because he was interested in Kate Bush, and he was going to do a report with Wilhelm Reich. He's now
Yeah.
30, almost 33, which was kind of funny. I said, well, it's not going to really do much if it's only tabletop size, right? And that's the boy who has visited Herman's store quite a few times.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look. Is that store still, if I'm in Michigan again, is that store?
I
still
believe it
my
is.
daughter? Huh.
It's
What's it
called
called?
the Treehouse.
I look forward to seeing it sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are you doing for the rest of today?
I'm going to make some cheese.
Nice. I've
We're
gotta go
making
to a-
farmer's cheese.
Yeah.
And tomorrow I'm
Yes.
going to make mozzarella. No, I'm going to make ricotta tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah.
Never made cheese. Well, good luck with that. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in to the Regeneration Podcast. Again, if you're listening to the podcast, go check it out on YouTube. You can see some of the images. And
And I have one more thing.
Say
before
it.
you go. Kate Bush,
Yeah.
this wouldn't have happened without you. And anytime you want to come on the podcast, please be.
So
you can-
she's still
you can Find
alive?
my email. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. She's
I
just
had a
couple of
college
years old,
suite mate who was definitely in love with her, kind of in that way that like a movie star, that she was glamorous.
Yeah.
But it was kind of that type of thing. But that was my freshman year was filled with Kate Bush, because he had Kate Bush posters all over his room.
Okay. Here, I have one more story.
Okay.
And this is true. I've often had dreams that I was married to Kate Bush.
Wow.
And I couldn't figure it out why. And I'm telling my wife, I said, yeah, I keep dreaming I'm married to Kate Bush. Isn't it the weirdest thing? And she's like, no, it's not. I'm like, oh, sorry. But I figured out that my wife has features similar to Kate Bush. They don't look a lot
Interesting.
alike. But there was one time I was watching a Kate Bush video with David Gilmour. And one of my kids came and said, is that mom? So they don't look dissimilar. So I think that's what happens.
David Gilmour? That would be new to me. She's like,
Oh, it's cool. It's
yeah,
David Gilmour actually discovered her when she was
Yeah.
a teenager.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And there's a video out there of Kate Bush and David Gilmour doing live running up that hill,
Wow.
which is
Something
very
to look
cool.
for.
Very, very well done. From about 1989 or so,
Well,
I'm guessing. Okay. All right. But yeah, so Kate, you want to come on the show?
we'll love to have you, Kate.
We'll have to schedule you in. You
right.
have to send references, but we'll get you in.
Everybody have a good week here at the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you again next week.
Okay. Take care. Hold on a second there. There we go.
Cool.
All right. So let me stop recording. End.
That's easy for me to cut out.
Okay, you want to end for all?
Yeah,
Ready?
say end for all.
All right, we'll see you, Mike.
Oh, see ya. Thanks so much.
Yeah.